It was a late summer afternoon, the kind where the sun leans low and golden across a school parking lot, and everything feels just a bit slower than it should. The air was warm, thick with cut grass and the sweet scent of old pine mulch. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands resting quietly on the steering wheel, watching people walk toward the entrance of West Haven High School. The class of '83 reunion, 30 years. They'd sent the invitation 6 months ago, printed on heavy cream cardstock with gold lettering, like it was a wedding. You're cordially invited to celebrate 30 years since graduation. I had almost tossed it out. I mean, why go back? What was there for me? But then again, something tugged at me. Not revenge, not pride, just the quiet desire to be seen, even just once. I smoothed my skirt one last time, adjusted the pins on my lapel, and opened the door. My heels clicked across the asphalt like a slow drum roll, steady and calm, just like I had trained them to be, just like we were taught in formation. The school gym hadn't changed much. Still the same scuffed basketball floors and banners hanging from the rafters. Regional champions 1982, track team state finalist 1981, frozen in time. The tables were dressed in navy blue cloth, candles flickering gently in hurricane glasses. Everyone had a sticker on their chest with their name written in thick Sharpie, stuck crooked over polos and floral blouses. I was already being watched. I could feel it. I hadn't been the popular one, not the cheerleader, not the prom queen, not even the class president, just quiet Lila. Lila, who spent lunch under the trees with her sketchbook. Lila, whose father drove a delivery truck and whose mother cleaned motel rooms. The kind of girl you forget 5 minutes after graduation. Lila. I turned. It was Brian Decker. Quarterback. Still had that perfect jawline, though the hair had retreated some. He looked me over quickly, and his smile twitched like he wasn't quite sure where to place me. I almost didn't recognize you, he said, and it didn't sound like a compliment. I smiled politely. It's been a while. He leaned back, hands in his pockets. So, what are you doing these days? Retired already, before I could speak. Another voice chimed in, Jennifer Collins, flanked by 2 other women holding glasses of wine. Oh, come on, Bree. She probably married some rich guy and settled down. Right. Lila, she said, with that same old laugh, the kind that always made me feel 2 inches tall in high school. I felt that sting in my chest, that old familiar heat rising up. For a moment, I was 17 again, standing in the hallway outside chemistry class, clutching my books too tight while Jennifer whispered behind me. But I didn't flinch. Not anymore. I just looked at her calmly, letting the silence do the work. No, I said. I stayed single, graduated West Point, served in Afghanistan, Iraq, Korea, commanded the 22nd, promoted last spring. Brian blinked. Promoted, Brigadier General. The room seemed to exhale all at once. One of the women with Jennifer choked slightly on her wine. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just nodded, excused myself, and walked toward the drink table like I had done this 1,000 times because I had. And yet, my hands were trembling. Not from nerves, from something deeper. From the years. The invisible weight I'd carried since I was a girl sitting on the edge of a bunk bed. Listening to my parents argue about money downstairs. From the days I went unnoticed in the halls. From the silent dinners, the skipped birthdays, the letters home that no one ever answered. I stood there for a while, sipping water, watching the room hum around me. And I thought back to one specific day. It was winter. I must have been about 10. My brother had gotten into another fight at school, and my mom was at her wits' end. Dad wasn't home, not that he ever really was, and the house was cold. I was trying to do my homework on the couch, tracing out each math problem slowly, carefully, because I knew if I messed up, no one would help me. Mom stood in the kitchen, muttering. I remember hearing her say, "That girl's always hiding, always drawing in those damn notebooks. Like she's gonna draw herself out of here." And maybe I did. Maybe I didn't use a pencil, but a uniform. Maybe I climbed the ranks not just because I was capable, but because I was invisible, and no one saw me coming. I didn't have a family legacy. No one paved the way for me. I had to teach myself how to press a shirt, how to make my voice heard in a room full of shouting men, how to mourn friends quietly under desert moons, how to stand tall while others fell apart. And now here I was, at the reunion I almost skipped, with people who once called me a nobody, now looking at me like they'd missed something important. Later in the evening, when the music softened and the lights dimmed, I stood near the back wall, watching the others dance. Some still avoided me, unsure of what to say. Others offered timid smiles. Then I heard it. The side door opened, and a man in a sharp Marine uniform walked in, clearly younger. One of the event staff, perhaps security. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on me. He paused, straightened, and gave a crisp salute. "General, ma'am." The music didn't stop, the laughter didn't pause, but for a brief second, everything inside me stilled. I returned the salute, quietly, formally, and this time, my hand didn't tremble. You know, it's funny. I never came back for applause. I didn't need to be praised or crowned or told I made it. I just wanted to stand in the same room I once walked through silently and no longer feel small. Have you ever returned to a place or a group that once made you feel invisible? And if so, did they see you this time? Let me know below. I'd love to hear your story. The evening went on, the way those events always do, awkward at first, then too loud, and finally, too quiet again. People lingered around the tables with old photos taped to poster boards, yearbook snapshots, prom pictures, a crinkled shot of the senior trip to Myrtle Beach. Laughter bubbled in little clusters, the kind that echoes both nostalgia and denial, as if remembering the past could rewrite it. I walked slowly between the tables, scanning faces I used to pass in the halls. Some looked the same, just softened by time. Others had changed entirely, but none of them had stayed frozen like they were in my memory. Even Jennifer. She sat at table 7, heels off, rubbing one foot while her glass of Chardonnay tipped a little too close to the edge. When she looked up and saw me, she straightened like she was suddenly aware of her posture. "Hey, Lila," she said, her voice a bit quieter this time. "That was pretty impressive earlier." I didn't say anything right away. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. That alone seemed to catch her off guard. "I didn't come here to be impressive," I said. "Just came to sit where I once didn't feel welcome." Jennifer looked down. A flicker of shame passed over her face, and for the first time in years, she didn't look like a queen bee. She just looked like someone who'd carried her own stories too long. "I was awful to you in school," she finally said. "I know that now." I nodded slowly, not offering comfort but not rejecting her either. "You were a kid." "No," she replied firmly. "I was old enough to know better." We sat in silence. The hum of voices and clinking glasses became background noise, like waves against a dock. "You know," she said after a moment, "my oldest daughter just left for college, wants to join the Navy. Said she's tired of hearing her mom talk about wine nights and weight loss. Said she wants to matter." I raised an eyebrow. "She already does. She just wants you to see it." Jennifer smiled faintly, looking down at her empty ring finger. "It's strange, isn't it? We spend half our lives pretending we're okay, and the other half wondering if anyone noticed we weren't. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I too had worn armor, not just the kind with medals and stripes, but the invisible kind, the kind you build from silence, from not being chosen, from being last in the lineup every time. I didn't say it. I just let her sit in her own reflection. Sometimes, that's kinder. Just then, a soft voice interrupted us. "Excuse me, General Lila." I turned. It was a woman I didn't recognize right away. She was short, plump, wearing a sunflower dress and holding a small purse in both hands like it was something sacred. "I'm Nancy. Nancy Kemp. We weren't close, but I remember you. You used to sit under the elm tree during lunch. You always drew things in your notebook." I blinked. That memory hit me like sunlight through a dusty window. "Yes, I remember." She smiled nervously. "I just wanted to say, it meant something. Back then. I didn't know how to be brave. I watched you from the window sometimes. You just sat there, quiet, like you didn't need to prove anything to anybody. I envied that. I couldn't help it." I smiled. That little moment, so small, so far back, had mattered to someone, and I had never known. "Thank you, Nancy," I said gently. "That means more than you know." She nodded, eyes misty, then turned back toward her group. I watched her go and felt something inside shift, like a weight had lifted. Or maybe it had melted, slowly, over the years. Sometimes, the things you do when no one's watching are the things that echo the loudest in someone else's life. I glanced back at Jennifer, who was now quiet, staring off into some memory of her own. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" she asked me suddenly. "Not to change anything, just to stand up for the girl you were." I thought about it. "No," I said, honestly. Because the girl I was, she kept walking. Even when no one clapped. Even when no one asked her to stay. She kept walking. Jennifer's eyes welled, but she blinked the tears away quickly. "That's what my daughter is trying to be," she whispered. "I think. I just didn't know how to support that." "Then start now," I said. "You don't have to be perfect. Just present." The band started up again, a familiar 80s ballad, and the dance floor began to fill. A few couples swayed in slow rhythm. Someone tripped and laughed. Someone shouted out for a song they used to dance to in the cafeteria. I stood up and looked around the room once more, not out of pride, but out of something deeper. Completion, maybe, or clarity. Because you don't just come back to your hometown to show off your medals. You come back to see if the child inside you is still hiding, or if she finally feels safe enough to step out. I walked over to the poster board covered in old photos. There I was, third row, near the edge, chin tucked down, bangs too long, holding a sketchbook close to my chest like armor. Next to me was a blurry photo of the science fair. I hadn't won, but I'd stayed after to help clean up, just because I liked the quiet. I gently peeled that photo off and slipped it into my purse. Not because I needed proof, but because I wanted to bring that girl home with me. As I made my way toward the exit, I noticed a group near the coat check, 3 men, all former ROTC members, now silver-haired, slightly hunched. They'd been talking loudly earlier, but now they stood in a quiet line, waiting. When I passed, they saluted. Not as a joke, not out of obligation, out of respect. I returned the salute with a soft nod. Then I stepped into the cool evening air. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Crickets chirped in the grass, and the distant glow of a street lamp buzzed above me. I took one last look at the building, West Haven High, where no one knew who I was, where I used to believe I would never be enough. Now I know I always was. Have you ever carried a version of yourself quietly for years, only to find that others noticed more than you realized? Feel free to share your story in the comments. Maybe someone else is waiting to hear it, too. That night, after I drove home, I didn't go straight to bed. I took the long way, the kind of route that winds past the bakery that used to be Mrs. Connor's corner store, past the football field where we used to sit on the bleachers just to watch other people's games, past my old house still painted the same dull yellow, though the fence had long since collapsed. It was strange how small everything looked now. I parked across from the house, engine off, headlights dimmed. No one was home, or at least the porch light wasn't on. The curtains were drawn tight like always. It looked just as I remembered, a little tired, a little forgotten, but still standing. I sat there in silence, the weight of years catching up to me in my chest, not in a dramatic way, just in that quiet ache that comes when you realize how much of your life was shaped by things you never got to say. My parents had both passed about 10 years ago. Heart failure for Dad, stroke for Mom. No dramatic last words, no teary reconciliations, just endings, quiet ones, like the way the heat slowly fades from a cup of tea no one's drinking. I never wrote back when they asked how I was. I never sent pictures. I didn't even tell them about my first command. At the time, I told myself I was too busy. But really, I didn't know what I'd say. How do you explain to people who never really saw you that you became someone worth seeing? I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old envelope, yellowed, soft at the edges, unopened, addressed in my mother's handwriting. No return address, just Lila Martin, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I'd found it last year when packing up boxes. I had never opened it. I wasn't ready. But now, sitting across from the house that raised me, I unfolded it slowly. Dear Lila, I hope you're safe. I don't know if this will reach you, and I'm not even sure what I want to say, but I'm trying. Your father's knees are worse. He doesn't walk much anymore. He watches the news and says your name every time they mention the army, but he doesn't write. You know how he is. I saw a woman in uniform today at the grocery store. She had medals on her chest and a steady look in her eyes. I thought about you. I wondered if you look like that now. I hope you do. Sometimes I think about your drawings, about the time you taped one to the fridge and your brother tore it down. I never told you, but I kept the pieces. I taped them back together and tucked them in the top drawer of the desk. Maybe I didn't say much back then, but I saw you. I did. If you're reading this, maybe we've already missed each other. Maybe not. But if you ever come home, and I'm not here, I want you to know I was proud. I just didn't know how to say it without crying. Love. Mom. I don't remember crying when I read it. Not right away. But something inside cracked. Not like a sharp break. More like a soft crumbling. A wall that had held for years, slowly giving way. Because we don't always need a perfect ending. Sometimes, we just need a sentence, one clear sentence to remind us we mattered. I stayed in that car a long time. Then I got out and walked across the street. Stood at the edge of the lawn. The grass was overgrown. A few weeds tangled near the steps. But I didn't walk up. Instead, I knelt down beside the front gate. There, in the dirt, half buried, was the corner of something white. I brushed it aside, a tiny sun-bleached toy soldier, plastic and cracked. My brother's. Probably. He used to leave them everywhere. Back then, he was the star, the loud one, the boy Dad always called tough, and I was the quiet shadow. But shadows see everything. They remember. I stood again, letting the wind touch my face. And for once, I didn't feel like I was outside looking in. I felt like I'd come full circle and finally stepped outside of something I had outgrown. Back at my apartment, I placed the letter inside a small wooden box, alongside a photo of my old platoon, my grandmother's locket, and a folded corner of the base flag from my first overseas assignment. Each one a piece of who I had been, who I had become. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a blank sheet of paper in front of me. Not for orders, not for a report, just a letter to myself. Dear Lila, you did it. You stood in the room where they once looked past you and you looked them straight in the eye. You carried silence like a shield. But now you carry voice like a sword. And you didn't need applause, or medals, or a parade. You just needed peace. You're allowed to let go now. Love. Yourself. I folded it gently and slipped it into the same wooden box. Because sometimes, the letters we never send are the ones we most needed to write. And you, yes, you. If you're reading this and you've ever felt like the background character in your own life, I want you to know your story is real. Your presence matters. Even when no one clapped. Even when they said you were nobody. You weren't. You just hadn't arrived yet. Have you ever read something, a letter, a message, even a memory that changed the way you saw your entire past? If you feel comfortable, share it below. You never know who it might help. The following week, I received an unexpected call from the high school. It was Principal Arlo, a man whose name I barely recognized until he said it used to be Mr. Arlo from Science Lab. He had taken over as principal 5 years ago and now oversaw renovations to the school's west wing where a new alumni honor wall was being installed. We're including a few exceptional alumni who've made national service contributions. He said, "Your name came up. Actually, it came up more than once after the reunion." I was silent for a second. Then I asked, "You sure you've got the right Lila?" He chuckled. "I'm looking at a photo of you receiving the Legion of Merit." I'd say we do. There was something about the way he spoke, gentle, unhurried, respectful, that made me say yes. And 2 weeks later, I was standing in the very hallway where I once walked, with my shoulders slouched and my eyes glued to the floor. But this time, I wore my full uniform. And this time, there was a plaque on the wall engraved in brass, centered under a soft spotlight. Brigadier General Lila Martin, West Haven, class of 1983. In service, in silence, with strength. They let me choose the inscription. I thought about putting something official, dates, ranks, locations. But those words didn't feel like mine. The real journey had happened in the quiet, in the rooms where I stood unnoticed. In the years no one asked how I was doing. I brought flowers that day. Not for me, for the girl I used to be. I placed them on the ground beneath the wall, white lilies and soft lavender, tied in a ribbon. I stood there alone for a few minutes before a group of students began to gather at the far end of the hall. A teacher motioned toward me, and a girl with a high ponytail raised her hand. "Excuse me, ma'am," she called. "Can we ask you something?" I turned, smiling softly. Of course. The group of maybe 10 students, a mix of boys and girls, all around 16, approached me slowly. A boy with braces and a too big backpack spoke first. How do you become someone like you?" I tilted my head. "Like me?" "Yeah," he said. "You know, important?" I laughed, not at him, but at the question. Because that's the thing, isn't it? We think becoming someone is a destination. I didn't try to be important. I told them. I just kept going, even when no one clapped, especially then. A girl with a sketchpad tucked under her arm looked up at me shyly. "Were you ever scared all the time?" I said. But I learned something in the quiet. Being scared doesn't mean you stop. It just means you walk forward while it's still dark. They nodded. solemn in that way young people are when they're hearing something they'll carry with them, even if they don't understand it all just yet. I looked at them, their wide eyes, their fidgeting hands, and for the first time, I saw not students, but future echoes. Of me, of all of us. You don't have to be loud, I said. You don't have to be chosen. You just have to choose yourself. Every day, even when it's lonely. The teacher thanked me, and the students moved on, some pausing to look at the wall. One of them took a picture. Another quietly whispered, "Cool," as they walked by. That word cool made me smile more than any medal had, because I had never been cool before. Not in school, not in family, not even in life. But I had become something else, something quieter, stronger, a presence. After they left, I wandered a bit. The art room was still there. Room 117, its door now painted light blue. The oak tree outside had lost a few limbs, but its trunk was still solid. I walked past the library, which now had computers, but still smelled like old paperbacks and hope. I slipped into the back rows of the empty auditorium. I remembered sitting here, once, for awards night. I hadn't won anything. I just came because it was expected. I remembered watching Jennifer walk up to the stage to receive something, a scholarship, maybe, and hearing the applause echo across the room. I had clapped, too. And now, sitting in that same seat years later, I thought about that moment, about how much of life we spend clapping for others while silently wondering if anyone will ever clap for us. But sometimes, we learn to clap for ourselves, because growth isn't always public, and transformation doesn't always need a stage. I whispered to the empty chairs, "You were always enough." And I meant it not just for me, but for anyone who's ever sat at the back of the room, waiting to be seen. As I got up to leave, I saw a small card wedged into the side of the seat. Someone must have left it there recently. It was a folded note with neat handwriting. To the future me. If you're reading this, I hope you didn't give up. Even if no one sees you now, keep going. One day, you'll walk back here. And maybe, just maybe, someone will say your name with pride. I stood still for a long time, holding that note. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in my coat pocket. Right beside my own letter, 2 voices, from 2 versions of the same story. One reaching forward, one looking back. Both hoping. Have you ever spoken to the child version of yourself? Or found something years later that helped you forgive the past? If so, you're not alone. Share it below if you feel ready. Someone else may need to hear it, too. The next few months passed in a quiet rhythm. I returned to my base assignment, wrapped up paperwork for a transfer, and began thinking about something I hadn't allowed myself to consider in a long time. Retirement. Not from life, just from the title, from the armor, from always needing to prove something. I started visiting a little cafe near the river. It wasn't fancy, just chipped mugs, flaking tables, and a kind waitress who never asked too many questions. I'd sit in the corner by the window with a book, not really reading, mostly watching. The world moves differently when you're not being chased by duty. You start noticing the way sunlight lands on the rim of a coffee cup, the sound of someone laughing 2 tables over, a toddler singing nonsense into a biscuit. And in those small moments, I felt something I hadn't in years. Stillness. Not silence from suppression, but a quiet earned. A quiet that no longer needed to protect anything. One afternoon, I received an invitation in the mail. This time, not from the school. It was from the Department of Defense, sealed in navy and gold, inviting me to speak at a memorial ceremony for fallen service members. I almost declined, not because I didn't care, but because I wasn't sure I could. Too many names, Too many nights. Too many times I stood in front of parents and widows, saying the same rehearsed lines while my heart whispered other truths. But I accepted, because some silences must be broken. The ceremony was held on a crisp October morning. Rows of chairs filled the open green lawn outside Arlington, flags lined the walkway, and the brass band played low, steady hymns that felt like prayer in motion. I wore my uniform one last time, not because I needed the world to see it, but because I owed it to those who never took theirs off. As I stood at the podium, I looked out at the sea of faces, some tearful, some composed, all carrying invisible weight. I didn't begin with a quote, or a headline, or the usual commendations. I simply said, I want to tell you about one soldier, and I did. Not about the medals, not about the missions, but about the night she sat in silence beside a young private who didn't survive his injuries, about how she held his hand as he drifted away, whispering, "You're not alone," about how she stayed long after the medics had left, just watching the desert sky, not saying a word. I told them that sometimes the greatest acts of service are not recorded, not published, not pinned to chests. Sometimes they are simply witnessed and remembered. When I stepped down, a woman approached me. Her son had died 5 years prior. A quiet boy, she said, always sketching things. She handed me a photo. I recognized the eyes. "I think you knew him," she whispered. I nodded, lips trembling. I did. We stood together for a while. No words, just the shared understanding of what it meant to carry someone's name, even when they're gone. Later, I walked through the rows of headstones, fingers grazing the top of each one like a silent roll call. At the far end of the cemetery, I paused. There was no marker here yet, just a fresh patch of grass, soil still unsettled. I bent down and placed a small stone on the edge. Not because I knew who it belonged to, but because someone should. We all want someone to come home for us, to stand where we stood and remember. And when that isn't possible, we become that someone for each other. On the way back, I didn't turn on the radio. I drove in silence, letting the hum of the road and the rhythm of breath be enough. That night, I took off my uniform for the last time, folded it with care, buttoned each cuff, smoothed the creases. I placed it in a cedar box alongside my medals, my letters, and the photo from my reunion. Then I locked the box, not to bury anything, but to honor it, because you cannot carry everything forever. Some things, once they've done their work, are meant to rest. I poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and I thought of you. Yes, you. The person reading this who may feel like you've gone unseen, who wonders if you've missed your moment, if your story was too quiet, too unfinished, too far from the spotlight to matter. Let me tell you what I've learned. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be followed to be worth remembering. And you don't need permission to become someone your younger self would be proud of. You just need one thing to keep showing up. Even when the seats are empty. Even when no one claps. Even when the road is quiet and the lights are dim. You keep walking. You keep standing. You keep being. Because one day, you may look back and realize you were never invisible. You were just ahead of your time. Have you ever reached a point in your life where you finally felt complete? Even just for a moment. If you have, tell us about it. And if you haven't yet, know that your moment is still waiting. It's been almost a year since that night at the reunion. I still visit West Haven now and then. Not for long. Just enough time to breathe in the familiar air, walk past the gym, and peek through the classroom windows. Some of the teachers are new. Some of the trees have been cut down. The lockers are now digital. And there's a mural in the hallway with handprints from every graduating class. but the echo of who I was still lingers in the corners, not haunting, just present. Sometimes I'll stop by the honor wall and find fresh flowers there. Not from me, someone else. A student, maybe, or a parent. Once, I found a thank you card taped under my name. Inside it said, in purple ink, I didn't think I could become anything until I read about you. Now I want to try. That one stayed with me, not because it was grand, but because it was real. And real things, the kind that change us, are rarely loud. I've started writing letters, not reports, not briefings, just letters, to students, to women in service, to young men who write to ask how to survive in silence without going numb. I answer them all not with answers, but with stories. Because sometimes stories are the only thing that make us feel seen. One letter I received recently came from a girl in Idaho. She wrote, "Everyone in my family tells me I'm too quiet to do anything important. I draw in my notebook during lunch and they say I'm wasting time. But your story makes me think, maybe quiet isn't weak. Maybe it's just another kind of strength." I sat with that for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Quiet isn't the absence of courage. It's often where courage begins. That's something I believe with all my heart. You see, we live in a world that rewards noise, applause, visibility. We're told to take up space, speak louder, market ourselves, shout our worth into a crowd. But no one teaches us the power of stillness, of holding steady when the world looks away, of carrying kindness through disappointment, of showing up day after day with nothing but integrity and a name no one applauds yet. So I've made peace with not being famous. Instead, I've become something better, steady, kind, remembered by the right people. And once in a while, that quiet strength echoes back. Just last week, I was walking through the grocery store, hair pinned back, simple jacket, no ribbons on my chest. I was picking out apples when a man passed me with his daughter. He looked at me twice, hesitated, then turned back. "Ma'am," he said gently. "Are you General Martin?" I blinked. "Yes." He extended his hand. "My son served under you. In the 22nd. He used to write home about how calm you were under pressure, how you listened. He said, that's what made you different." I didn't know what to say, so I shook his hand and nodded. And then his daughter, maybe 9, maybe 10, stepped forward and saluted. She didn't say a word, just held her little hand to her forehead, awkward and crooked and beautiful. I returned the salute, and for the first time, I felt the full circle of it all. Because that girl will grow up. She'll be told she's too quiet, too strange, too soft. She'll wonder if she's wasting her time sketching in the margins. She'll sit in the back of the room and think no one sees her. But maybe she'll remember this moment. And she'll remember that someone like her once stood tall. That is legacy. Not statues, not fame, but memory and permission. Permission for someone else to begin. So here, now, as I sit on my porch with the sun warming my knees and the wind brushing past the trees, I want to tell you something I've never said out loud. I forgive them. The classmates who overlooked me, the teachers who called me average, the family who expected nothing and offered less. And I forgive myself for believing them, for carrying their voices in my head like they were law, for shrinking to fit the story they wrote about me, for spending too many years chasing a kind of applause that was never mine to need. You don't need to wait to be applauded. You don't need to be crowned, voted, chosen, followed. You just need to be rooted in who you are, in who you've become, in the silence that raised you and the strength you built inside it. Because one day, it might be years from now, a stranger will say your name softly, with reverence, and you'll realize you've become someone worth remembering, not because you were loud, but because you were true, and that's more powerful than any title. So let me leave you with this. Wherever you are right now, whatever stage of life you're standing in, pause. Listen. Do you hear it? That quiet voice inside that says, keep going. You are not invisible, because you're not. You never were. And one day, someone will salute. Not because of your rank or medals, but because of the quiet legacy you left behind. Have you found your strength in silence, or are you still searching for it? Step by step if you feel ready. I hope you'll share your story below. Someone might be waiting to salute you too in their own way. The day I officially retired, the base was quiet. No ceremony, no speeches, just a signature on a form and a quiet walk to my car. I didn't want a farewell. I'd seen too many over the years, grand send-offs full of clapping and photos, and then silence after the door closed. I didn't want closure. I wanted continuity. I wanted my next steps to feel as true as the ones that got me here. So I drove past the base gates, through the open plains, under a sky so wide it felt like a second chance. And I ended up exactly where I began. West Haven. Only this time, I didn't stay in a hotel or sleep in my car outside my childhood house. I bought a little cottage on the edge of town, just 2 bedrooms and a porch that faces east. I planted wildflowers in the yard and started feeding the birds. I learned the names of the kids who rode past on their bikes, and the older couple next door who still danced to vinyl records in their kitchen. For the first time in years, I didn't need to be anything for anyone. No commands, no formations, just me. And that was enough. One evening in early spring, I received a letter from the school. Inside was a handwritten invitation, not a printed flyer this time, just a folded note that read, "Dear General Martin, we're hosting a legacy assembly for our graduating seniors. Would you come? Not to speak, just to sit quietly, just to be seen. Some of them need to see what quiet strength looks like. Warmly, Principal Arlo." So I went. I wore a simple navy dress. No medals, just the silver pin from my first deployment tucked at my collar. I took a seat in the back row of the auditorium, and I watched as young men and women, some shy, some loud, all trembling with future, took turns reading their essays, their hopes, their letters to themselves. One girl walked up, clumsy in her heels, and unfolded a wrinkled paper. Her voice shook as she read. I used to think I had to be loud to matter, but then I read about a woman from this town who served her whole life in silence and still changed things. That gave me permission to stop shouting, to just be steady. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. Afterward, she walked off stage, and our eyes met just for a moment. She nodded. I nodded back. And something passed between us. Not words, just recognition. That night, I walked home under a sky full of stars, and I thought about every version of myself that had brought me here. The girl with the sketchbook, the woman with the silent uniform, the soldier with the letter in her hand and no one to send it to, the daughter who waited years to be told she mattered, the general who finally laid her armor down. All of them, still here, still walking beside me. Sometimes we wait our whole lives for someone to come save us, or validate us, or tell us who we are. But eventually, if we're lucky, we realize we are the one we've been waiting for. And when that moment comes, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like peace, like standing barefoot in your own home, windows open, and knowing that no one can take your story away from you now. Not because they've acknowledged it, but because you've claimed it. Every invisible inch, every quiet mile, every room you once entered unseen. You see, I was never supposed to become anything. According to them, not loud enough, not bright enough, not born into the right kind of family. But here I am. More than enough. And not just because of what I did, but because I never stopped walking. That's what I want you to take with you. The walking. The part where you kept showing up, even when the seats were empty. The part where you kept trying, even when no one called your name. The part where you believed, even if only a flicker, that someday your silence would become someone else's courage. Because it will. It already has. There is someone out there younger than you, quieter than you, more lost than you watching, and they will remember you. Not for the medals, but for the stillness, the steadiness, the way you carried yourself, even when no one offered to carry you. That is your legacy. And mine. So let me ask you before we close this story one last time, have you returned to the place that once made you small and stood tall? Have you let yourself become the person your younger self once needed? And if you haven't yet, are you ready to start? You don't have to be loud. You don't need a title. You just need the courage to keep going, even if no one claps, even if no one watches, because someone will, one day, someone will salute you with their eyes, and you'll know. You were never a nobody. You were always becoming somebody, on your own quiet terms, and that is something worth standing for. Thank you for walking with me. Now, it's your turn.